Hello, everybody. Welcome to our Friday lecture series, November 6th. We are very excited to welcome Miguel Bracelli. He is coming to us from the McCall Center today. He's been working with the School of Architecture. He's in residence at the McCall Center and currently based out of New York. For the introductions today, I'm going to pass it over to our own Jose Gomez, faculty from the School of Architecture here at UNCC. Jose, take it away.
Thanks, Eric. Welcome, everybody, and welcome, Miguel. I'll provide you a little bit of an intro. Miguel, correct me if I'm wrong with any of this, but some of this you've provided, some of this I found via some of your interviews that were on your website, and so I'm hoping it's still accurate. But what I think I find interesting personally, from my own perspective, is that Miguel has a background in architecture. He's been a faculty member at various schools of architecture that we'll touch on in just a moment, but he describes his work as a practice of exploration through collective performance, and particularly through public spaces and participatory projects, which I think, again, resonates with my own interests in the way that I look at architecture in the public realm. I found an essay or an interview from, I think, your residency in Baltimore, Miguel, where you described yourself as becoming an artist through the practice of being a professor, and that working with your students, engaging in ephemeral projects in public space allowed you to create a new understanding of these practices, not just as art, but as education. And really what I found profoundly interesting, and I think the students here today will find as well, is that act of developing a methodology, it itself becomes a significant part of the art. It is, in many ways, it sounds from your work, sometimes as important as the resulting project, the resulting collaboration, or the resulting object. Most of his projects, Miguel's projects, have been large scale, developed in a variety of countries throughout the Americas: Argentina, Bolivia, Chile, Costa Rica, Mexico, Spain, even Sweden, and the United States. If we think really broadly about the Americas, maybe we can claim Spain and Sweden as part of that. Of course, his home country, Venezuela, as well. What's, I think, particularly timely for all of us is that much of his work touches on a range of conflicts that we see going on, having to do with notions of border, notions of migration, notions of identity that rely on some set of geographical conditions, sometimes hybrid and binational, not just thinking singularly about what it means to be a human in our era. His work has been exhibited widely in galleries through a variety of art and architecture biennales in Latin America, in Europe, and the United States. His collective performances have been presented across the country in a variety of contemporary museums, from for example, the Hemispheric Institute in New York to UNAM in Mexico City, with recent recognitions as the Sondheim Prize in the US, or finalist for that prize, a Future Architecture Fellow in 2019, Leslie King Hammond Fellowship Award from MICA in Baltimore, 2018, Young Artist Award of Principality of Asturias in Spain, 2018 also, and the Supertrema Public Art Competition Award in Spain from 2017, among other significant international accolades. He's also been an associate professor in the Faculty of Architecture at the Universidad Central de Venezuela. He's had several participatory and educational projects with institutions such as the Modern Art New York, MoMA, Museum of Modern Art in New York, MoMA, the Museum of Fine Arts in Caracas, the Embassy of the United States, and the Embassy of Spain in Venezuela, and of course with our own McCall Center here in Charlotte, North Carolina, and his collaboration with the college this semester. He's been a visiting professor in a variety of schools of architecture in places like Sweden, Chile, and Venezuela, and he's currently a Fulbright scholar working and living here in the US, as Eric said, recently from New York. With all that, I'll turn it over to Miguel.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you, Eric, for this invitation and for arranging all of this series. And thank you, Jose, for this great introduction. You did a good research, I see. Maybe you can send me that paper and I can upload my own my own biography, because it was very good and appreciated. Okay, I will share a screen right now to start the PowerPoint. Okay, I'm sharing a screen right now, sorry. Can you see it?
Yes.
Perfect, okay. So yes, honoring the introduction of Jose, I will start with architecture. Yes, my background is in architecture. I did my studies in Venezuela. And I will explain just this project, which is actually the only permanent work that I have. All of the rest that you will see, they are like ephemeral projects in public space, more related with performance or ephemeral architecture. But this project still exists. It was an installation in these big favelas in Caracas. As you see, these favelas, they are like one of these most important characteristics in, like as a challenge to resolve. It's like they are extremely close, like the facades are very like, they are not open to the landscape and to the community, and they try to build their own environment. So with this project, we did the opposite. We tried to create like this transparent building, engaging with the landscape and trying to approach both spaces from this experience. And above all, also, most of these projects in the favelas are focused on the idea and solving the needs of this project. But in this case, we try to do the opposite. We try to do something related with the art and also like a structure, basically a playground to relate with the landscape from a playful way. We call it La Nube, which is we could be translated as the cloud, which is the way that we related with landscape, but also it is the way that the experience that we would like to create from the people of this place. Secondly, we developed like a similar project, but I say similar, but it's like very in opposite way because it's extremely ephemeral. But it's similar because this is in the same context of big favelas in Caracas. You can see behind the image like this part of these barrios or like informal structures built by the citizens. But it's in this case like we are like in the downtown area, like in the middle of these mountains with houses. And the title is Otro Cielo para Petare. Petare is the name of the favela, and Otro Cielo para Petare could be translated as another sky to Petare or a different sky to Petare. And we create like this roof, like simulating this sky close to the children, like going down the sky, creating a different atmosphere. But the whole experience of the project was to explode these balloons as a collective performance at the end. And why is that? One of the things about this area is like one of the problems or challenges are the extreme violence in these places, that you can hear like gunshot every time in every hour of the day. So this idea of fear is very present. So what we tried to do, it was to resignify the sound of the gunshot, like to change the memory that could be triggered by this explosion, but associated with a different memories with this playful experience. It is interesting because many of the projects that you will see after this, they rely also in the documentation and as an artwork, like from the very important visual standpoint of view. But in this case, it is about experience and sound. So it's another way that we approach. And in this case, like the goal was to create these memories, like to resignify the sound. In this third project, I think I've been trying to explain how this translation between art and architecture with like permanent projects, then probably art, less architecture with this performance and social practice. And now we'd like to introduce another layer, which is education. This is not exactly the moment of education as art, which is the main title of this lecture, but I will go later with the subject. But this is like similar to that because it is in the environment of like a university campus, my alma mater, which is the Central University of Venezuela. similar with the other projects, are connected with the huge social political crisis of Venezuela. It was the national strike of public universities, the universities of the state, that in our cases, they are like completely free. But also they are facing like a huge problem of funding. Like, for example, the salary of a professor could be $8 per month, not per hour, per month, like the salary of a month. So you can have an idea starting from that, how not only affect like professor or like research and so on. So all these universities get united in this national strike in 2013. And for this moment, we created like an open call to bring books to this space, which is kind of like the core of this university campus. It was books from donation from the School of Architecture, of School of Humanities, and many other professors and people that are part of the campus. And the important thing is it was these books, they were there for free, so people can take and grab them to take them home. But at the same time, for us, it was a statement to remind to society the value of the academy and the role in society in general. And we were trying to engage with other people outside the university with our struggle. And that's why, for me, this image is very important, because I think it's a powerful image that explains also the project from its poetic content or side. And also, that's also the other part of the images, so that we can speak to another audience outside the project. And this project, it went viral in social media, and also it made the national news. So I think like we try to use a different strategy, like to stop a highway, for example, or even to do a banner with a powerful line. We try to speak from the academic spirit of these spaces, and also engage with this architecture and the murals that you can see that are part of the campus, because that's another like important topic of this place and research, that this university campus is like a UNESCO World Heritage, because of the relation between art and architecture in a huge modern artwork of urbanism and architecture in Venezuelan history. So we were trying to also to honor this tradition and the relevance of this space, intervene in this space, understanding that right now the art has a different approach, like not only murals or sculptures that you can see in the campus. We create this like ephemeral project to address this connection between art and architecture from the art that we're doing today. So even when this project born in a specific social-political context related with the crisis of the public universities, it was a project that it has a lot of sense to continue developing in many other places. So we went to other squares or public space in Caracas, making this open call to people to bring books. We collect the books for several months, and then we spread the books in public space so people can take them freely. What is important also is to understand this project in the context of Venezuela, that we don't use to relate in a good way with public space because it is insecure, because there is a lot of problems of maintenance. So we use abandoned areas of the city and revitalize them with this installation. And again, talking about the reconnection between art and architecture, this is one of my favorite projects in that research, because even when it is an artwork, I think it is one of the projects that is most connected to architecture, because it is just pure program. It is just programming the surface. Like we know that one of the big difference between these two fields, art and architecture, is function. And in this case, we're creating libraries just with the programming the surface. But even though, like the way that we relate and display it, it is come from land art reference and many other reference about public art, that came in this kind for me in between space in these two fields. So after this project, we start to think about other ways to relate with people. This is in the same university. This is the Aula Magna, which is the place where we graduate, the place of the commencement. And this sculpture that you see in the roof, they are Alexander Calder's sculptures, clouds. Probably is one of the most important sculptures of Alexander Calder, one of the biggest installation. And it's interesting because in this case, it is extremely attached to architecture. So, and it is attached not only to the space, like with the function, because they are like acoustic panels. So this idea about synthesis of the arts and connecting art and architecture that is present in this campus, this is like the most important piece to address those ideas. So after 60 years in this anniversary, the university commissioned this project to honor and celebrate this work of art. And when I say commission, again, we need to go back to the Venezuelan crisis. We didn't receive any fee or any money to produce the project, just the idea, if you want to do something, we can work together and find a way to produce a work. So we decided to work just with people, and we create a huge open call to visit this Aula Magna and create these Alexander Calder clouds with our movement. So what we did is that we draw these clouds outside the campus in several places. They were in 1-to-1 scale. So it was interesting because again, we were like going down with these clouds to the floor and to the surface and approach them to the people so you can know how they are and inhabit and run around them. And then, again, there's no difference between art and architecture because we were building ephemeral spaces just with our movement and displacement around the campus. It's something that you only can have like in the experience and in the documentation. And now we can add another layer of the work that for me is very important is like the documentation of the work because it also could be understood as a painting, for example. And it's a way, again, to engage with another audience that is not part of the performance. So the documentation is not just like a record of the action that happened. It is also like a work that it has its own autonomy that can speak itself about the project and trigger our thoughts and ideas to another viewer. And in this image, you can see these thoughts about the synthesis of the arts, like this research from the architect Carlos Raúl Villanueva working with other artists in these murals, like this clock that is kind of like a sculpture. And you can see these clouds inhabiting these spaces in this campus, but also understanding the idea of the synthesis of the arts today, when the art has changed, where we have another approach to the viewer, like with the social practice, with people participation, and not only engaging with the moment of the art, also engaging with our own moment in the university campus in our own crisis. I recall one professor who participated in the performance. He was super excited at the end of the project, and he told me that for him it was kind of like a catharsis. And I think this idea of catharsis, of having this catharsis about our own crisis, it was kind of like a way of care and relief. And I think that's what we were doing with this project is the projects that are in our own possibilities to develop and working with our own people and community. I think this was basically with the students, professor, people who, alumni and friends of this university, which also is like the biggest university in the country. So it's also a very important symbol of our own identity as a country. And after that, we continued this research, but also working with other materials. This has been also my experience, like changing and shifting from architecture to art. And also, like, I was also discovering the art world. I was discovering like so many other references that was nurturing also my own practice. So we decided to work with another material, and in this case, the place again is very important as any other project. As you can see, I think like the place is a very important part of the work. If we understand this as painting, like we need to also understand and acknowledge that in these paintings, like the place, it is not a white canvas. It's a canvas with a lot of content, social political contents that you need to deal and work with. So we were in Caracas, in the downtown area, in the governmental area. It could be equivalent to Washington, D.C. in the U.S. And the call to action in this project was to create a common area, a common zone in this part of the city. And it was connected with the big polarization between citizens in Venezuela that were against or with the government. And at some moment, I felt that this division was something built from the government as a way to stay in power, like use this hate and division and try to play with this division with their own benefit. So we were trying to banish this discourse, like creating this common area where everyone can take part. So we make a huge open call in the press, in social media, inviting people, friends, working with the university again to be together, creating this space. And one of the best memories was like it rained, but nobody left the performance. They just shift and cover themselves. So everyone that was taking part, it was taking part through another experience that we didn't plan it. And talking about architecture again, there is a quote from a Venezuelan architect, Fruto Vivas, who stated that the architecture begins when you raise your hand to cover from the sun. Like in this gesture, there is kind of like a small gesture of architecture. And thinking in the same idea, the idea of being covered and creating this shelter, that's another moment for me to play with architecture. Not to say that this is architecture, because I'm totally clear that this is art, and I'm proud that this is art. And I want to be acknowledged as an artwork, not as an architecture. But I do want to acknowledge how like my education in architecture is present in this project and allow this research. I've been noticing like many other artists working with architecture use architecture as a subject, but in this case, I think like people like me who are architects working in the art field, we use architects in another way, like more in the way that we engage with the place and space. And I think this is like an extremely powerful knowledge also for any other artist working in this discipline, especially working in public space. With this work, I understood something very important, that every work in public space is subject to change, that you have an idea, but then you discover the project in the doing, that you need to work with everything what's happening in the place, from the social political context, from the environmental issues. And every work is a surprise. I think that for me, that's the adrenaline that move this practice, that you don't have a total control of the work, and at some point you became a viewer of your own project. And again, the way that we take the pictures and film is a very important, it's a keystone of the project. In this case, for me, this is one of the most important pictures, because you can see the statue from Simón Bolivar, who is our biggest political figure in history. He's a military, he has another issues, but he's like the most relevant figure. But in this case, he's from behind, you cannot see him. He's another citizen like us, anonymous. he lost his own presence, but at the same time, he's a witness of the action, which I think is a very important part of the project. Talking about working in public space, yes, you need to work with the weather, but also like another important aspect is the people that didn't know anything about the performance, but end up joining the performance. In this case, it was a kid from the street that he was around, and he started to help the people, telling them that if you take the water out from the roof to the floor, it will be more easy to move. And then he discovered that I was leading the performance, so we end up leading the performance together. And like this is my favorite moment of this project, because I think that's, for me, the magic of working in public space, that you really reach another audience. It is not just the people like used to go to the galleries and the museum. So it certainly can reach many other people that are part of the city and discover something together. After this project, we developed this practice in many other scenarios, like changing the call to action, but with a similar research. In this case, the title and also the goal, because there is no difference between the title and the call to action. It was in Spanish, sacar el mar. It could be translated as pull out the sea or take out the sea. It is not as poetic as I think it could sound in Spanish, but that's my translation for the moment. And the idea was like to go to the sea together and trying to do something impossible, like try to deal and work with a metaphor about take out the out of the world, the ocean. What I think is important is the way also about how people from a specific place and community can relate with the place that they belong to another experience. In this case, like feeling the weight of the water, and also like having these thoughts and conversation or reflection about this, just about the subject, about how to do something impossible and what is the sense and the purpose of that. And similar in Bolivia, but also related with the place in other levels, like Bolivia has an historical fight, a political fight with the neighbors between Chile and Peru to have an access to the sea. So we found these dunes of sand, and of course without the sea. So we will try to recreate the sea with a performance that, again, it was a way also to trigger these thoughts, but also to create this experience and memories with the people, like feeling the waves of the wind, for example, and created these sculptures with the body. Again, every project for me is something that I don't know how it will turn until it happens. And I like to think that the result or the outcome of this project, it was this boat navigating this sound. So this ghost boat navigating this place, navigating this history and this struggle and this memory in this place. And I think this is the last project of this series, working with these lines and ribbons in the last case, because at some point I realized that this was a research that I need to evolve to another with another approach and with another elements but with this final project, it was like a performance in Costa Rica. This is in a volcano. We are in the crater of a volcano, beside the crater, and we were creating a 10% of the scale of the crater, drawing its forms together. And it was interesting again because you don't know what will happen until it happens, and the viewer, it is also like the artist, and we are also like the artist, but also like we are transforming into the participant and the viewer at the same time. We transform this crater from the circle to lines, and we're exploring these forms and shapes. But even beside these like powerful pictures, I like also these pictures about the process, because in these pictures you really can understood the relational aspect that is part of this project, and do you need that is a very important part because it's the only way to make it happen. There is a lot of experience that I didn't know until I participated recently in one of them. Like, for example, like when someone push you or move you further. So it is very hard to find their own rhythm or a rhythm together. So it's a very slow process, until it happened. But there is a lot of sense of community that you need to build together. And also it's a sense of community that you build with a very like soft gesture, just like working together with the body and feeling these structures together with the body, sometimes even with no speaking. And it's something that you can see in the videos. And the video is like right now one of my most important research, because I understand that the videos, it also could work as painted, but it also could work as a way to explain to the audience these projects in a more better way. And in another product or outcome of these projects, it is the sculptures that born after these performances. I never throw away the materials. I transform into these pieces that I like to call books, like books to read with the body, books to read between two people, or book of traces with all the marks and traces of that are kind of like a leftover of the performance. And talking about this division that exists between, or this contradiction between if the documentation is a construction or is a documentation of the performance, I think the photograph, it could be like an independent outcome, but these sculptures, for me, these books are more close to be a document of the performance, because these are the real leftover of this performance, and you can see like how they are like transformed. And this is kind of like a new research, this artist book, and also allows to the viewer to have like a sensorial experience with this project. And now I will begin like to explain the educational projects, and I will begin from the beginning, because this is one of my very first projects before all these research start to happen, working with my student from architecture, interviewing the campus and creating installation around the university campus. There were installations that we began working with the School of Architecture in our building, and then we did the same projects in the fine arts museums of Caracas. And it was interesting also the way how the student needs to change the projects with to a new place. So this idea of site specificity, how do you have a strategy, but then with another context you need to change or adapt your own strategy. So like in this relation between site and place for a student, like for a student from architecture, it was a very interesting lesson. Also, another layer is that the buildings are from the same architecture from different periods. So it was also another way to understand and relate with architecture from this installation. And after that, what we started to do is like each student develop a specific project, and then we pick a project and we develop together as a group, starting to work in these large scale projects in the campus, recycle materials to transform it in these ephemeral architecture or big sculptures. And there were just like architectures that you can move around the campus. So we were having a class about urbanism, about urban form, but at the same time we were playing with the campus, and also understanding the values of this architecture, or the values of this campus in regards with these ideas about synthesis of the art. Connecting art and architecture in this modern project, but also reflecting in about our own perspective about what is architecture and what is the relation between art and architecture today in these ephemeral projects. So after that, every project it become more performative, more ephemeral. We don't have any structure now. There was just like this parachute. And the title of this project it was Houses for Flying. It was a project for first years of architecture where you begin your career as an architect or as a student of architecture, and the first assignment is to design a house to fly. So for me, this is a way to reset their minds about what is architecture, but also to engage with matter and form and also in context from one-to-one scale projects and a real experience. So like saving the gap between the project and the drawing and the execution of the construction, which is a big challenge in the education of architecture. And at the same time, having like an artistic but also a poetic approach to this discipline. But also at this time, I started to just like having fun with the student, and the way that I started to engage and relate with education, it was different. So right now, I really think that going to public space and use public space as this canvas to work and learn is a very powerful medium and a very powerful strategy to engage with education. I think like educational spaces need to go to real life and learn from real life, and also made a contribution to real life. So also we started to work with other communities. I don't have this presentation, this project here, because they're more connected with architecture. But also we were like working with the idea of a client and working with a specific community to build something to them, while the students were learning something from that experience. But in this project about houses for flying, I like to think that they were like learning architecture, like for example, the way that this architecture is built and relating with the landscape, where the window can be all over the place, the sunlight, it goes beyond the structure and is part of the architecture. So they were learning about this environmental architecture, inhabiting those spaces and playing with that. And that's why my way to create like this kind of like a syllabus, where again the documentation then is another part of the project, even when this is like a real class with a student of architecture. Like for example, this sculpture that you can see to the left, it is a sculpture from Jan Arp, and the title is El Pastor de Nubes, like the shepherd of clouds. It is connected with Alexander Klaus that they are inside of the auditorium, but this sculpture is outside. So what is important about this sculpture is like they're like a symbols, like a very important icons of our university campus. Like you have your commitments with the clouds inside, and then you take the picture with the sculpture here. So there is a lot of myth and things around this work of art. And the idea of having these houses for flying then become also these clouds flying around this sculpture. So again, the photograph and video, it is another way to engage in a very specific way to this context. And here we are working in the classroom. Well, actually the classroom is in the other side. This is the hall. It's a huge hall, but we like to work in the hall, not in the classroom. And it's the only way to create these projects. In this case, this is another project. The title is Casa Cuerpo. It could be translated as body house, where they are also a student from first year of architecture, and each student needs to design a house to their own body. So they're learning about proportions, scale, structure, materials, the relation with the body, while they are creating this sculpture that is extremely connected with their own bodies and movement. And at this moment, I understood that for me, the educational practice was part of my of my own practice as an artist and as a creator, and there is no boundary between these two fields. And that's where the title of this lecture, Education as Art, come with this kind of a project. And what I like about this idea is that it is not just the experience and the knowledge, or even the photograph, films, or documentation. I think here, like, the methodology is the substance of the work. The methodology as this structure to make these things happen, and where each student propose their own projects, but they are part of this big taxonomy of this family of projects. And at the end of the day, it's like the maximum of conceptual art, because it is just this idea transformed into methodology to make some things could happen, but not only happen, also could grow in the form of knowledge. And after this project, we create this other one. The title is Habitar el aire del cuerpo. It will be translated as to inhabit the air of the body. And I find it very poetic in the way that the air of the body is something that you have inside, but it is this paradox about you're inhabiting a structure that is that comes from inside you, and then it is only exists about this collective rhythm, something that we certainly cannot do right now. And I think that's also why I really like this project at this moment, because many of this project was trying to enhance like people participation and engage with the body, with all the sensorial experience of our the sensorial conditions of our human condition somehow, and something that we lost right now, and I think something that we need to find a way to recover. So, like, okay, finally, I will present some projects also to explain how this research began related with some landscape in a more sensorial way, but there was this idea also about this sociopolitical content. Then they start to become more important in this project. And then this idea about just working with a material, this material or this line, it transformed into more complex objects, like creating this flag. And this project, it was related with the political polarization in Venezuela between citizens with different perspectives. And it was the same of this project, like creating a flag of two poles. And there's these two poles trying to raise the flag in one of these sides. And it's kind of like a loop performance of something that cannot happen until they end up working or raising the flag horizontally. And now we'll show you a video, and I can have some water. This video is in Chile, in the border between Peru and Bolivia. It is a place where the Pacific War took place 100 years ago, a war for the ocean, the Pacific Ocean. Chile won the war, so they have a lot of military heroism in this place, and it's a heroism connected with the dictatorship of Pinochet in the 60s, and also an heritage that we still have right now in this area, and it's connected with education because the students have like a very military education, and you can see like in these places and this canon that is not part of the war, but they recreated. So we did a performance with this student from a high school nearby. And in this case, the call to action was to enterrar las banderas en el mar, to bury the flags in the sea. The other thing that we're dealing right now is like in this place, there is a lot of issues related with xenophobia because of recent migrations from the borders, but also from other countries like my own, like Venezuela to Chile. And this idea about burying the flags in the sea, for me, was another way from a poetic action to create this performance with a student, to also have another approach to these ideas and trigger another memory. So we, at some point, you will see that, no, we went down in the hills. Until they approached the water. So even when I think it is not entirely education as art, it is not the educational component is not as strong as other projects. I like the idea of being working with a student in having the same conversation that they could have in some other these ceremonies about raising the flag. So to convey this military education through a performance and trigger another reflection on idea. For me, that's the educational component of the work. And also have like this conversation about the history and the landscape, like live in this experience in the same landscape and the same places in order to trigger this memory. So yes, I started to work more directly with creating objects and dealing with these objects in this performance. In this case, we are in Baltimore, next to Baltimore City Hall. And it was a performance with a student from MICA. It was a workshop, and this student, it was actually like 6 or 7 students signing for the workshop. And something that was interesting for me is like they were all foreign students, mostly from Asia or from Latin America. So we create this project that is like this giant black flag, but it's a flag made of strings instead of a single surface. So for us, it was like a flag explaining like the complexity of national identity. That is something that you cannot fold or unfold perfectly, like this military ceremony. But again, like as any other performance that you discover the result once it happened, and once that something that I like about this performance, it was like the similitude with this iconic image of Iwo Jima, like raising the Iwo Jima flag. But in this case, there was mostly a student from Asia raising this flag in the US. And we have a second stage of this performance. So the first one, it was more for the camera to create this military ceremony with this flag made of strings. And the second one, it was in the context of a day of service, in MICA Day of Service. So each student was working in several programs around the city, but we gathered together at the end to have lunch and have like this ceremony that it was nice because it was more playful than the other one. The other one was just for the camera, but it was just from the experience. So this is the last project. I know this is almost the last project, and then we can have this conversation. But this is a very important project for me because it is a project where I think I was able to finally combine this research about performative, collective performance in public space with the idea of education as art. We create a one-to-one replica of this obelisk, this big monument in Mexico City. I will show you a clip. And we inhabit the monument. I like this idea because it also looks like an assembly, and I think that was the goal of the project, like to have an assembly to decide what to do with it. So we decided that we were going to move it to a park very close to that area. This wasn't the first time that I was participating inside the performance, carry the object. And it was a good lesson also for me, because I am very worried about what is experienced from the viewer, and I understood that I don't need to complicate it so much, like just the idea of having this subject and find a way to move it around the city, which was not easy, but I think that was the charm of the project. It was the whole experience. So about how to resolve something together, I think that's what we get as a result of this experience, or as a memory. And then the video continues until we move into the park. That was the image that I was explaining when we were around the monument, and you can see like the vertical monument with one single person statue against the horizontal monument with like this assembly around it. We go inside the obelisk, and we create a class. So actually, it was a class with a student from art and architecture to have this discussion, but in public space with a real element, to know their dimension, to have discussion about how many bodies and people fit horizontally, how many does vertically. So it was another way to learn from the experience and from the body, which is the main core of most of this experience. And I think that was another like discovery for me. We were not supposed to jump in, but we didn't at the end. So we transformed the monument into a playground, and until we break it and we renewed it. And that's another picture that I like, because also you can see that the collaboration between the people that are working there. And I like that people that are working there like illegally. They took this place, but it's something that normally happen as the same way that we did in the street without any permit. So like we are in the same page like of collaboration. And I like to think that also these projects born for me in Latin America, because they are only possible in places or contexts like ours to make it happen. And finally, this is the last project, a project that I've been working in the US. The title is Geopolitical Games. It began with the pandemic as a way to work with the difficulties of social distance, like just working in a one-to-one game with my friends and neighborhoods in Baltimore City. And then we were working with these blue and red balls, knowing that we are like in these electoral years, and knowing that there is this increasing polarization in the US. This is a video that I took of this performance, but now this video is on exhibition in Washington, D.C., in a facade. This performance began with a volleyball game, but then the second part is like each participant deflate the balls. So for me, it's another way to a metaphor about giving the power to the people and not to the politicians, and also like deflating nationalism, and also having this catharsis about this element in these difficult times of the process about deflating the ball. It wasn't planned like that, but I discovered like having that and doing this, it was like the most interesting part of not only for the experience, also for the documentation of the project. And finally, this is the last image with the project in DC. It is in a theater like a few blocks away to the White House, and it states, "United in democracy, polarization is a weapon for the perpetuation of power." It is connected with my experience in Venezuela about how polarization and this division is a strategy for the government as a way to stay in power. So I was trying to project this video in this time, try to hold to democracy, which right now I think is what is happening right now, and I'm very proud and also kind of jealous of the US, of knowing that you have like a democracy that you can trust. But also it's like I wanted to talk about my own experience about polarization, because I think it's also a thing that we need to solve in this country for the future, that it will still present for the next few years or more. And in this case, like for me, the marquee is an intervention, it's as important as the video. It was a huge struggle with the people from the theater because they wanted to put the dates and so on. And I need to brought to the Jenny Hosser to the table to say this could be us. This is part of the artwork. And in this connection about public space and the specificity of the play, I think like for me, the power of this place, it is of this project, it is taking place in this site. So just addressing these two political power in DC is the whole point of this project. So now I will stop share screen, but we can have any conversation, question, thoughts that you may have.
Thank you so much, Miguel. That was great, very inspiring. I really love the discussion you've been having, in your own practice about art and architecture. And I really appreciate how the way the projects kind of come together. It seems like they contextualize through the through the performance, like with the flags on the sea or the books at the university, that they, through action, they're really, providing this critical thinking for the participants and the viewers. I think that's amazing. So thank you.
Thank you.
So there's a couple of questions that came in during the talk, particularly at the beginning of your talk. Caitlin asked about, that these projects are very large and involve a lot of people, and it seems like a complicated task. How can you just talk about how long a project like maybe the book project takes to set up, and how, what that involves?
Yes, like for example, the book project. But that's interesting because that project, it was in the context of this national strike of public universities. So it wasn't something that we didn't plan in advance. It's something, okay, we have this issue, there is this protest, there is this big opportunity to say something in a different way. So it was something that we planned in a few days. So, but I think it was an example about many things that work at the same time. Like we found the donation, but with that exception, like after this project, when we start to develop in another places without this context, we take about a few months to collect all the books, and then we go to one day to the public space, and then it lasts for that day, but it's a huge campaign to promote it. I don't know. It's like, for me, it's very strange. Like I have this idea that in Venezuela, this was extremely fluid and not so complicated. But I think it's because I was part of the community. So it took me like 10 years to be in a university and have this community and all of these many contacts like in press and news and many other things that make it happen and come together to make it possible. Right now in the US, it has been like extremely challenging for me to develop this kind of practice. I think also there is something cultural that is part of this, and that I think is a very important part of the equation that I'm trying to figure it out, of the way that we relate and we work together in a different way. I don't know, I think that's for me a very important lesson that I'm learning and trying to understand. But they could be, but I think like the answer in a simple way is like, I think they are not so complicated as they look. That for me, the advice, because you need to think that this project born in a country in crisis, in a university in crisis, with no resources, with any, just my intention and the help with many other friends to make them happen. So, and then you can see like the project with the drone in Chile and so on, after I had my own practice and recognition that institution invite me, and you have a huge production behind. But at the very beginning, it was just me working with a student to make it happen.
Nice. No, that makes a lot of sense. And, and I think it touches on what you were saying in the presentation, and what I mentioned at the end, that, part of, your exploration of art and architecture is, is topical, right? It's building on what you're seeing and the momentum, or responding to a space, or an issue. So, that makes sense, that the fluidity is it changes, and you're now based in the US trying to gauge that fluidity, right? And build the community. So
yes, and also I think it's another context with another interest, with another way of thinking. So it's something that I need to learn. And that's the challenge about this community practice. That I think at some point you need to be part of the community to make it possible in a better way.
right, yeah, that makes sense. So Malik from the senior thesis class is asking, after reading your Naked School essay, I would like to pose the idea that artwork is a thesis, or an argument of some sort, not something definitive, just something that after we observe what is in the world, uh, let's see, artists take on the situation with our available information. Would you agree? What do you, can you parse out some of that? What do you, I think what he's saying is that you artwork maybe isn't, well, in your essay you kind of talk about that artwork isn't a controlled thing, maybe, that it's more of a back and forth, more of a conversation.
Yes, like I think for me, yes, it is a thesis. It is an idea in a research that I would like to develop in a more profound way. But I think like the better examples to prove that thesis or idea are the projects as Body House, where they are part of a syllabus with a classroom, but at the same time they are part of like an artist research, and I think the collective side of it with the individual part of the artist are extremely connected, and you cannot divide those two spaces. And also the idea of like the substance of the work relying on the methodology is for me the way to prove that the idea of the artwork as a formative or as an educational project, different to other projects where you can see like this burying the flags in the sea. It could be understood more as a performance and as an educational project. But then in other projects like this, in the horizontal monument one, it was a class that we had in public space, and we decide what to do with it. So the borders between one another are very complicated. So yes, I think for now it's just an idea and a thesis, but it's something that I would like to continue as a research. And when I say as a research, not only from practice, also from theory.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that makes sense. So there's a couple of questions from the class as well, and asking further about like the Naked School essay that you wrote. In what ways do you propose academic art change from the institutionalized white cube format? And then like a kind of follow-up or a second part is, does your experience, at school in the US versus Venezuela have anything to do with your ideas, like the way you've kind of formed these ideas?
Well, like the difference between an art school in Venezuela and the US, I don't have the answer because I went to an architectural school. So I don't know if it is something in my background related with the country or related with education in architecture. And I have the feeling that I think in Venezuela, we could have a similar approach to art, like extremely focused on the white group practice, even when I think our own social political crisis is very present in the work. So that leads a path to another way to social practice. But even so, I think like from the educational point of view, it is extremely similar like to the US. I think the answer for me should start not only from the student. I think it needs to start also from the professors. Like the task, it needs to be outside. And the final goal, it needs to be outside. When you deal with an outside in practice, like you're dealing with real problems. So even when it's about dealing with the wind, like you're dealing with something related, something that is happening in real time. But even though when you're working in public space, you need to have conversation with the people that are part of the place. So you're engaging in so many ways just of the idea of being outside. But it's an idea that you can go as farther as you can, like working with a specific community with a specific topics. I think I'm not trying to abolish like the white cube, because as you can see, I also work with a white cube. I see it, I exhibit the photos or the video or produce these objects, but it is not the main goal, and it's something that it will happen or not. So the works doesn't depend on of being exhibited in a wide world. The works happen in public space, and then it will be exhibited in these spaces or not. But it also could exist in social media. It also could like exist as a way to trigger some ideas or concept to a specific kind of moment.
Yeah, that I think that's, you know, this idea of education, art education, training itself just for one venue, one particular spot is limiting, whereas, you know, having these more transformative forms of the artwork. And that's what I really liked about your documentation in like the books of traces, the way you took the materials and then reconfigured them for the white cube kind of setup. I thought that was a really interesting you know, way to not to kind of even rethink documentation, right, of the projects, that it's not a video, it's these objects that people have handled and manipulated.
Yes.
Awesome. Let's see, another question I was interested in, and I guess it's more of a comment, is the idea of in the performative works, how you think about scale, and maybe this has more to do with your architecture background versus, you know, your, well, I guess it's kind of both to me, but the way people become you know, scaled into the space, you know, they become part of the performance, they become part of the object, I guess, that I see happening with like the ribbons. Do you think would that be a fair statement to make, that they're kind of part of the artwork, or they're embedded in the artwork in some way?
Yes, I think they are embedded. They are embedded in the experience, but also they are embedded like in the image. And I think like above all, they are like embedded in the landscape. And I think for me, that's important of the large scale and the big picture, because it's a picture of the landscape and it's a picture of collectiveness. So that's, I think, like the trigger that I would like to, like the idea that I would like to trigger for another audience, like this group of people creating the crater of the volcano, or creating this common area in Caracas against polarization. So like the scale is a very important part of the project, because also I think like working in public space, that's one of the biggest challenges, that you need to work with the dimension of the scale. So if you're doing like a site-specific installation to the white box, you need to work with the dimension of the space, and that's part of the project. But their dimensions are very regular, like they don't change so much as maybe sometimes with another museums or galleries to other spaces. But it do change when you go out to public space. And I think like that's one of the greatest challenges. So that you really need to work with the scale of the city. And I think it's not that ambitious about the project. It is about being in dialogue with the scale of public space, or of the scale of landscape.
Nice. Okay. Thank you. There's another question that came in. What was what made you change your architectural practice to being an artist? Or do you differentiate those things still? Or
Yeah,
are
no,
they...
yes, I definitely difference both. I think I began thinking as an architect. I think it was again connected with a crisis because I was looking for different ways of build projects that I can do by my own or funding by my own. So it was a huge anxiety to make things happen in my country, and also learning from that doing or from that building or the idea of building. But at the end of the day, like this idea of building, it become a performance itself. So at some point, it wasn't a goal, like to become an artist, something I discovered in the process. But certainly right now, I feel more comfortable with this space because the main idea of this project now, you understand that it's like about the social political goals and concepts or idea, and it's something that are more easy to connect from through the art than through an architecture. But I am very glad of like this background that because allowed me to also engage not only with the idea of the space, also with the idea of like the social commitment of this practice. And I think that's the difference between an education in art and architecture. Like of course you could have like a social commitment, committed education in art, but in architecture it's like it's for sure that it will happen. So it's the main purpose of architecture, to serve to the people. So this idea is like extremely present because everything that you're doing for someone else, not only for you or your own ideas or thoughts. And I discovered like at some moments, education in art school, it could be extremely self-reflected. And I guess it could have some advantage, and many people can see also and share this sort of reflection, something very powerful about our human condition could born on that place. But it definitely has been more engaged with the approach from more like a social commitment from the architecture, like to serve to many other peoples, and from many other like collective thoughts or challenge or situation that we can address together.
But yeah, how, like when you're conceiving of and like executing a project in with a class or a group of students, how do you foster and like negotiate their collaboration as the kind of leading artist? How do you direct and also kind of keep them engaged?
Yes, like in the project with a student from architecture, I think it was very easy in the way that like my part was like the task to create the task, and then the material. So it was the assignment, and then each student find their own way to create and solve the problem. But in other projects about like this horizontal monument, which I think is another good in between. I think it's just, but it's the same. Probably it's just giving like a problem to solve. We have this obelisk in the same scale, but horizontally. So what to do with it? So the negotiation was about the proposal, where to go, what to do. But at that moment, I think like the artist or the professor became kind of like this. People to moderate this discussion. So between people, you're kind of this panelists like merging ideas and combining ideas, but you're just articulating these thoughts with many people with this initial project as like have this monument in this scale in the city.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Miguel. We're kind of over time, which is great. But I want to again thank you, and I really enjoyed the presentation, and I'm really inspired by the work. So thank you so much.
No, thank you. As I mentioned before, like a time for advertising, we're going to have an exhibition that we're working with Adam Justit at the Gallery Row in a few weeks. We don't have the opening day right now, but it will happen, I hope, this month for sure. So you can visit, see many other videos, and contact me if you want to go there and meet you at some point. We can arrange something. So that's something that will happen on campus. So please visit it if you can.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I forgot to mention that at the beginning, so I'll have to bring that up again to the classes. But yeah, your show's you're gonna start installing soon in the main floor of the Row Gallery and will that be up through November and December then?
Yes, I think we don't have. We don't know if Adam will extend it on spring, so it will depend of everything what it will happen. But for sure, November and December it will be there.
Okay, awesome. So people can come meet you in person and see the show. And then the McCall Center mentioned they will have a talk with the artist in residence next Tuesday, November 11th on Facebook Live at 7 p.m. So a lot of opportunities, and I'm excited about the show in our Row Gallery. So we'll look forward to that too.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, everyone.
Yeah, take care. Thank you all. Thank you, Miguel.
Bye.
Take care.